However, before moving on to the end of course videos, I would like to spend one final bit talking about these stock characters and situations that you now have borne witness to in all of the plays that you have read all through the course. This particular play that you just read, The Braggart Soldier by Plautus, gives us an especially impressive example of all these stock characters and situations put together. But it's worth highlighting them one final time in order to see how they work in Greek Old Comedy and Greek New Comedy, especially effectively, to show that there were indeed some strands that made their way across the divide from Greek comedy to Greek New Comedy and then eventually into Roman comedy. So you've actually seen The Clever Slave all the way through. In this translation that you have, the clever slave's name very appropriately is Dexter. Dexter is the one who will eventually put through the plot to reunite the separated woman and young man and break the woman away from her contract that had been set in place, presumably illegitimately, by the Braggart Soldier. So the clever slave reflects the fact that frequently there is a role reversal, as we've talked about before, between slave and master. The slave will end up being far more courageous, well put together, intelligent, wise than his usually feeble-minded master. As you saw most clearly in Aristophanes, the frogs, Dionysus and Xanthias are really a wonderful example of Xanthias, who is your rather hapless but still fairly well put together slave, especially when you look at his final scene with Aeacus in the middle, as opposed to Dionysus, who's clearly quite cowardly and definitely not fit for the role of Heracles, whom he's pretending to be by disguising as him. So the clever slave represents a specific comic element because the slave ends up being able to operate well outside the bounds normally imposed upon him by his servitude. In like manner, the stupid master ends up being completely dependent on his slave. It's a little bit like the butler Jeeves in later English literature. The stupid master can sometimes be, of course, the antagonist, like the Braggart Soldier, or the stupid master can be, in fact, the one that the slave has to deal with, like Dionysus and maybe to a lesser extent Cnemon with Menander's Discalus. The Braggart Soldier we've already seen. In addition to our Pergopolynices or major tuple Acropolis that you saw in this play, there is also one Braggart Soldier in a different Aristophanes play we didn't read in the class, the one called Acarnians. This is Lamachus, the one who, as you already know, was one of the leading officials and generals at the doomed Sicilian campaign. Lamachus, in fact, was a prestigious war hero, so it's perhaps appropriate that in an ironic manner he is depicted as the patsy in Acarnians, but he ends up being the war-hungry general who is taken down a notch considerably by the pacifist Dicaiopoulos, whose name means just city in Greek. He's the one who concludes a private peace with Sparta and is able to get lots of wonderful benefits that other Athenians are denied, including especially the general Lamachus. So he's also a version of the Braggart Soldier. And then, of course, finally, where would comedy be without the pretty woman? So you've seen several pretty women. Lysistrata had the geographically based women. There was also, of course, the divine princess, whom Pistotyrus, or Make-Me-Do, marries near the end of Aristophanes' Birds. And then, of course, we have these pretty women. First of all, of course, the woman who is the object of the plot, the one who needs to get reunited with her lover, and then also those two very fetching prostitutes, the prostitute herself and her maid, who end up duping the major on behalf of the next door neighbor, who is pretending that the older of those two prostitutes is actually his wife. So you have all of these and quite a few more stock characters and situations. Typically, as you by now well know, you always are going to have separated man and woman, or someone who is supposed to be a slave or a prostitute, but actually is a free-born person. You could see that, of course, in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and quite a few other situations like that. So, in fact, although there are substantial differences among the two forms of Greek comedy and the Roman comedy you've seen, there are also surprising similarities, these threads that they do run all the way through. So I wanted to give you a little extra insight into that in a separate video. And at this point, we'll now start winding up the course with our final videos for getting you completed. Thank you, and we'll see you next video.